Welcome back to Tiny Grimes Games, and I'm here with another Star Wars Destiny video. And as promised in the Smuggler's Den podcast episode 2, this is the Vader Raider deck that I've been using that I think is maybe the best aggressive deck. If it's not the best aggressive deck, it's really, really strong. Let's start with our characters here. So we have Darth Vader in elite form, so 2 dice for Darth Vader, and 1 die for Tusken Raider. Darth Vader is incredibly strong. If you look at his dice, he's got a 2 melee, a 3 melee, and then if you miss on those, 2 disrupt really sticks it to your opponent and forces them to make some very difficult choices. As the Vader player, you know I'm playing an aggro deck. My goal is to do as much damage as possible, but if you roll a disrupt as your first roll, your opponent still has to look at that, honor it, and say, oh, what if he doesn't re-roll? What if this guy actually resolves his die and I lose all of my resources for the turn? I have to use them now. Uh, and also his ability puts a lot of pressure on your opponent because they're not able to do quite as much damage to you because they're consistently having to discard cards from their hand, which means less rerolls. So you're hitting them as hard as you can. They're hitting them maybe a little bit less hard than they could. Now, when you partner him with the Tusken Raider, you have a really interesting mix. While the Tusken Raider doesn't look that great, he only has 8 health, he's cheap, and that's really the point. It's hard to get a good character with Darth Vader, and his dice are decent. He has 3 damage sides, but more importantly, he has this amazing ability that actually makes people want to kill him. When you activate him, you're able to discard a card in your hand to resolve one of his dice immediately. This is insane. So one of the tricks that people often like to do is put really aggressive cards on Tusken Raider that allow you to instantly resolve them to do piles of damage, whether that be lightsabers, mind probes, cards like this, to where you can roll the Tusken Raider and say, oh, I hit the special on the mind probe, and I went first. I'll discard 1 card from my hand, resolve the mind probe, boop, 5 damage to you without you being able to do anything, without you being able to mitigate in any way. Essentially, the Tusken Raider breaks the rules of the game. I go, you go. Tusken Raider says, no, I go, and then I go again. So the Tusken Raider is very strong. Vader's very strong. Put together, you have 2 guys rolling a lot of damage. They're able to not just roll a lot of damage, but pump it out very quickly. When I talk about the Vader Raider deck, the build that I'm going to show you today, and the build that I prefer playing right now at least, is what I call a burn deck. It's basically a bunch of events in your deck that allow you to do piles of damage, but you only have a set amount of damage, so you have to be careful that you use them all. If they end up getting milled off the top of your deck, life becomes a lot harder. Okay, so what are these burn spells, as I like to call them? And we have 4 here in the deck. The most common one that you're going to be able to use is Force Strike. Force Strike is incredibly powerful because it, again, breaks the rules of the game. So you roll with Vader and you roll a shield and a resource. Not terrible. In some decks, you might be happy to resolve those. But this is not one of those decks. In this deck, your goal is to pump damage. And so if you have a Force Strike, you don't even have to re-roll. You just go, oh, remember that nice innocent resource I had? You took an action. Boom! I'm going to play for 1 resource, this event that will let me flip it to a 3 and just instantly resolve it. Again, breaking those rules, right? And just burning out 3 immediate damage. So there's 6 damage right there in those 2 events. The other event that is incredibly strong, and much more strong actually than Force Strike, but it costs 2. And in this deck, resources are scarce, but that's No Mercy. No Mercy is incredibly strong. It lets you discard any number of blue cards from your hand, then resolve one of your dice showing damage, increasing its value by 1 for each card you discarded. So if you think about that, if you're not using any tricks to increase hand size, you're hoping to have 4 blue cards with it that you don't really want. You discard them, you get a +4. This is really devastating because oftentimes what will happen is you'll get somebody, to 3 damage out of their 10, and they're feeling pretty darn safe. If you can roll the 3 side on Vader's die and then No Mercy it to 7, it's very difficult to deal with. Basically, anytime you play against the Vader Raider deck and your opponent is showing damage, you know you might get no mercy. Like, you really have to be thinking about that and thinking, oh my goodness, I have to do something about that die unless I'm just willing to take 7 damage. So because no mercy is only blue cards, I actually have crafted this deck to only have 4 non-blue cards in the whole deck. Another caveat with no mercy is I said you have X amount of burn damage in your deck, and you need to make sure you use it all. So if you have 4 strikes in your hand, do not no mercy the 4 strikes out of your hand. Use the 4 strikes first. Wait for a better opportunity to use no mercy. I played with someone the other day. They had one of their 4 strikes in hand. They were able to use no mercy to kill one of my 3 characters. Personally, a pretty weak one that I didn't care that much about. It felt good to them at the moment, right? Boom! I killed that guy. Yes! But in doing so, they gave up their burn that they needed later in the game, and then they weren't actually able to finish off even the second character because they just didn't have quite enough burn because they had just thrown one away. So be very careful. Do the math on the table. How much health does your opponent have? How many burn cards is that going to require? Another amazing card is Backup Muscle. Backup Muscle is 3 damage over 3 turns, which is good, but not amazing. But what makes it amazing is that it works around shields. So there's going to be a lot of decks that are building up shielded characters. Han is a great example of this. You might get him to 6 or 7 with a quick burst early, and then he just goes to 3 shields and stays there the whole game. And so your choice is basically get another no mercy to kill him off, or continually waste this damage and then have them go like ambush event, into ambush event, 3 shields, boop. He becomes a real pain to deal with. So that's why you have cards like Backup Muscle that over 3 turns, you will actually kill Han unless they have a way to save him. He's just going to sit there and be like, oh no. No, I see it. Han is dead. And if you get 2 of these out, oh my goodness, that really ramps up the damage quickly. The 4th burn card, which I'm a little bit less excited about because there's much more variance in it, is the Power of the Force. It sounds amazing, and in a lot of decks, it is great. Resolve one of your dice, treating its value as equal to the number of blue upgrades. Not in addition, just equal to that. A lot of blue decks play tons of upgrades. This deck, not so much. In fact, this is probably a card that will end up coming out. Electroshock has been spoiled, and that might go in its place. Several other cards might. It's a great slot to tinker with. It's a little bit of burn, but it's not amazing. Like, maybe you'll find your holocron early, and then it'll work really great. I found about the max I've ever gotten from it is 3, but it's usually about 2, which is really isn't that great. So it's an okay card, but it's just yet one more burn. All right, speaking of holocron, if you're playing a blue deck, it's hard to not play holocron. Holocron is really good. And the main reason I'm playing holocron with this deck is because it does come with some other burn, some other damage. Again, it's less reliable. What I love so much about No Mercy and 4 Strike is they come out of nowhere. You don't see them coming, and there's nothing you can do about them. Whereas both of these cards there is, right? There are dice. They're sitting on the table. They're saying, hey, I got my special. You should do something about it. But they're still really strong, and your opponent has to have an answer. Mind Probe, like I said already, putting on Tusken Raider is just insane and actually feels completely unfair. And Force Throw is both a control card, which will let you live longer, and it's a card that you'll be able to remove its special, be able to activate its special for basically a burn effect, being able to bounce one of their dice back. I will say the resources on this deck are so tight, you'll never, ever play a tighter resource deck. So the chances that you'll actually be able to pay for either of these cards are very low, and if you find yourself actually paying for them, you're probably not playing the deck correctly. You really want to be using this money to pay for your burn events, which are costing 1 or 2, and your mitigation. You want to be able to, basically, you want to be able to, in theories, play 1 mitigation card, 1 burn card a turn, unless your opponent rolls terribly and you're able to get away with being greedier. And then the holocron is just crazy, right? Like, the holocron is the card you're going to see talked about till the end of time. It's just really, really strong, especially in a deck like this that has very little resources. Being able to essentially get a 4 resource gain by going holocron, rolling the special, switching it for a Mind Probe is incredibly effective. I will say a piece of advice: I rarely pay the money to put out the die once I roll it. It's more of a, okay, cool, next turn maybe I have more burst damage. It's just not usually worth it. Resources are so tight in this deck. So speaking of mitigation, Mitigation is important in every deck, and it's really important when you only have two characters and they're, one is Vader, and if he dies, you pretty much lose the game. So there's quite a bit of mitigation in this deck. There are a number of shields. There are 2 copies of Hunker Down, 2 copies of Hidden Shadows. I'm assuming I'll probably end up changing this so it's only 3 total shielding effects. Hunker Down maybe will come down to a 1 because it's not a blue card. It doesn't combo as well with No Mercy, but it's really, really strong. Being able to get a shield every single turn, as long as your opponent does not have melee characters, is crazy strong. And even if they do, there's a great trick with Hunker Down. You wait till they resolve all their melee dice, you play it, you activate it, so you get a shield. Your first action next turn, you activate it again, or after they roll their melee before they resolve it. But essentially, you should be able to get 2 shields before they have a chance to resolve any more melee dice. And for most dice, that's going to be okay. Isolation is a great card. You're going to spot Vader, essentially, and remove one of your opponent's character dice. This is very great for keeping your guy alive. Feel your anger, very similar. An excellent mitigation tool, turning their okay rolls into terrible rolls, right? They roll 2 okay dice, 1 amazing one, 1 blank. Boop, the amazing one goes away. You're a winner. Deflect, I love. This could easily go down to a 1, and definitely will at some point as we see more mitigation options. But the decks that really scare you are things like Han. Han is the scariest dude ever because his dice, he has so many usually. It's like 2 Han dice, 2 jetpacks, and maybe a holdout blaster on Rey as well. And you're just looking at that and you're like, oh my god, that is so much range damage. And Deflect just wrecks that really well. And then Intimidate. Intimidate is kind of a meta card. I feel like if you don't have any way to handle shields at all in your whole deck, you're just going to lose some games. So, yes, if my opponent is all in on shields, I'm going to struggle. But I'll have that one moment, right? Like, as long as I play it correctly, I should have one window of opportunity where I can move all the shields on somebody, next action, do something big, like do a No Mercy to kill the person, or, do 3 damage that it looked like I wouldn't be able to do because there were 3 shields there. Essentially, more shield hate would probably be good if we see Han decks or Qui-Gon decks being the best deck in the meta or something, but I feel like it's just such a good card, especially in this deck where you have no money at all. It's really nice to have a 0-cost event that just completely surprises and destroys your opponent. Another thing that this deck does is works under the realization that it only has so much direct damage, right? So if you do your direct damage, you do 8, we'll say, against somebody like Han, and then he shields up. It becomes very difficult to finish that character off. And so we already saw Muscle Up is really good for this, for ignoring shields. And so there are other cards put in here specifically just to ignore shields. So Force Choke is a great control card, but this isn't really a control deck. I'm not that interested in the Disrupt. I'm not at all interested in removing cards from their hand. It's really the specials, unblockable damage that excites me most about the card in this particular deck. The same thing with the Lightsaber. It's great having more damage, but being able to have unblockable damage is fantastic. And Power of the Dark Side, I'd say I use this for 2 targets. It's either Vader to try to roll the big damage side, or it's something like Holocron desperately praying to roll the blank to get to 2 unblockable to either finish the guy off or get him closer for backup muscle. Whatever it is, this unblockable damage helps a tremendous amount. And then Kylo Ren's Lightsaber is kind of like this. His special is another really good anti-shields card. And it's just nice to have more damage. Like when you're rolling Vader, if you can find a way to get one of these lightsabers on Vader, it's just scarier, right? It's just more options for a big-time No Mercy. It's just that much scarier. They both work with Force Strike. They're blue cards that you can turn to melee damage side. So they're very strong cards. The problem, of course, like I said, money is crazy tight. 3 is a real challenge. So I would say there's a lot of games where I do not get them down. When I do get them down, it's oftentimes overwriting another card. So maybe I did something like Holocron into Force Throw, and I'm thinking, I really could use some more melee damage. I'm going to overwrite it with Kylo's Lightsaber or something like that. But don't think if you're not able to get them down that you're in big trouble. And don't think if you don't get upgrades down, you're in big trouble. I've had a lot of people play Vader Raider against me and complain like, man, I didn't get many upgrades that game. And I'm thinking to myself, okay. I mean, I've had whole games where I get one and win easily. Like, that's not the point of this particular build. For some people, I think it is. It depends on the build. So, lastly is the battlefield. And to be 100% honest, I'm really torn on the battlefield. I keep switching it around. Essentially, I don't want to give my opponents shields. I don't want to give them something like specials. I don't want them to loop cards. I don't want them to get cheaper upgrades to kill me before I can kill them. So I'm looking for the most innocuous battleground I can find. I've also used the Mustafar one that does 1 unblockable damage, which I also kind of like. And it's really difficult because there's a lot of games where I said I don't have a lot of upgrades. So I'm able to resolve my characters faster and take the battleground, take the battlefield. But I tend to like to play a little bit slower because I have all the mitigation effects. I don't want my opponent. I don't want to take the battlefield and just go for it. Go to town, do whatever you want for me. That is not my play style. And I think Star Killer Base does a decent job of, if you do end up doing that, you at least get to remove one of their character dice. What's really dangerous about it is that if you do something like, change one of your guys, re-roll your Vader to a damage, you really need that damage, and then they can just pluck it away. So I've generally not been playing this. I was playing the 1 unblockable damage. I've moved to playing this, and I'm not sure it's right. So I think there's a lot of room for experimentation in which battlefield actually works best with this deck. All right. So here is the deck list in its entirety, minus the battlefield, which, to be honest, you should do some serious experimentation to figure out for yourself. And hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time on Tiny Grimes Games.